But ESPN in particular has a real problem with storytelling around the NBA right now because it's so drama focused. It isn't about the game anymore. And when you lean, and the reason for this, I'd say, when I say drama focused, is because sometimes the NBA product does not sell itself in its current climate. Like when the season first started, there were a lot of complaints about there's too many three pointers. The game has become formulaic, and part of that is true. At the same time, though, because of the fact that the season is so long, you don't as fans, people don't always feel like they have to tune into every single game. So then you have writers who are trying to figure out, like, how can I make this interesting with some things that are also factual, but not trying to overplay it. But when one thing becomes another, and then that thing, let's say, for example, locker room drama becomes the big story, now, the ratings go up. And ESPN in particular and some of these talk shows cling on to that.
You've been pretty consistent with your articles about the big market, small market, how that's overblown. And we've discussed it on this show in terms of agreeing with that take. Can you kind of elaborate on that in terms of Oklahoma City and Indiana Pacers? A lot of your talking heads usually just really not providing a lot of intelligent discussion about this in regards to just the teams within the finals itself. But can you elaborate on your article about the small market teams in this year's finals?
Sure. I mean, I think that the idea that the reason that the NBA's viewership is small solely because of the market size, Indianapolis, Oklahoma City, is just a bit misleading. It's not false, but it's just misleading as to why the viewership is down. And the reason for that, I think, is because of the storytelling around the league has lacked over the past 4 to 5 seasons. And I think, in large part, we just move on too quickly. The NBA has leaned too nostalgic heavy. And because of that, there hasn't been any storytelling around some of these young players. I mean, I don't think the average person knows where Shea Gilgeous-Alexander or Tyrese Halliburton went to school, just because we're talking about like trade talk in the middle of the NBA finals. And I just don't think that's conducive for the fans, for the league, for its media partners. And it just dragged on for a very, very long time. Of course, when we had the Knicks in the conference finals, people were excited because it was the Knicks, and you had Anthony Edwards, and this superstar that media, I think, has pre-selected as the next guy. But when it came time to Halliburton and SGA and the Pacers and the Thunder, I think the league and its media partners sort of fell short. But it didn't have anything to do with the fact that people pointed and was like, "Oh, Indianapolis, I'm not watching that small city." I think that's just a little silly.
I concur with that point. I live in Denver, Colorado, and we have talked about Nikola Jokic and just the lack of coverage that he gets. And I've seen him play in person, but yet the mainstream media seems to not care about him, despite him being a multi-time MVP. I want to ask, you mentioned the league in terms of their lack of storytelling. Do you think they're in lockstep with, formerly TNT and ESPN in terms of telling these stories of the leagues, or do you think it's, these networks wanting to focus on kind of the more sexiest stories, and then they're kind of running counter on what the league wants? Do you think they're in lockstep in what you mentioned with nostalgia, or do you think there might be a little bit of separation in terms of like the producers at these companies wanting to run with just the biggest hot takes and what's going to get the most viewers, you think?
I think there's blame to place everywhere from top to bottom, but it does start with both the league, its media partners, and then I think it extends to the brands as well. When you look at the league, I think that, of course, you mentioned Jokic, and I think Jokic has to want to be a part of these things. Like, one of the things that the NBA has done very well historically is just sell. Like, the stars kind of sell themselves. And for Jokic in particular, he's not somebody who's forward facing, and so he has a right to go back behind closed doors and do whatever he wants to do. But just because that's his choice doesn't mean you can't storytell around him. It just means you have to find unique ways to do it. I think Giannis is another example of someone in Milwaukee who Nike leaned heavily on for a little bit, but now you see less of him. Obviously, Ja got in trouble. You see Ant with Adidas, who has done a fabulous job, but there isn't anybody who the NBA has just made a big deal. And it also isn't simply the NBA's fault as well. I think we've had this conversation about Jason Tatum for years. And the reality with Jason Tatum is that his most signature performance as an NBA player came in the conference semifinals when he has 50 points, I think in a game 6 or a game 7. It was a game 7 because he broke Steph's record. And most people just aren't tuned in for that moment. They're, of course, like, it's going to do well. It's probably going to be the most watched telecast of, whatever that time period is. But it's not the most famous moment that I think Jason Tatum wants to hang his hat on. And in regards to Halliburton here, like, yes, people said it was a historic run. They're comparing it to Michael Jordan and all these other people. But you have to make people want to live in the moment, not just remember like, oh, Jordan, LeBron, Steph, Kobe over and over and over again. Because when you beat the greatness of, Kobe played for 20 years, Bron has played for 20 plus years, Mike played for a little over 14 if you include the Wizards. Like, those are peak level of greatness. And some of these guys have only been in the league 6-7 years. And so when you compare them, it just diminishes their success that they've had early on. And I don't think that's necessarily fair.
Well, it's interesting because especially with Jordan, I think compared to other athletes in other leagues, I would say that his impact was probably a lot more profound, I think, as a single entity compared to with the NFL. It was like a rise of the league, at least when I was growing up in the 90s. I mean, it was, Favre, Steve Young, the Dallas Cowboys, there's all these teams, whereas with the NBA, everything centered around one man, and it was Jordan in terms of several facts. So, and I think you're right. I don't think the league has truly moved on from that, but it's tough because you have independent entities that what's going to get viewers, what's going to get the most clicks is, a race debate on who's the greatest, and not necessarily talking about SGA or talking about these other young players within the league. And I think when you mentioned John Morant, another player is Zion Williamson, who had a lot of momentum, and then injuries and other things derailed that. So I'm just wondering, with the league heading into this new TV deal with Amazon, with NBC, do you think that this problem of relying so much on nostalgia, do you think that will still linger on with these new TV networks, or do you think they might turn the page and focus on a new form of storytelling with the league?
No, I think they're going to do a lot better. I think that there's going to be a better balance, because if you look at the type of people that these broadcasters have hired, and then you look at the commentary that they have done, it's a lot better. Like, if you watch 7 p.m. in New York, Carmelo Anthony is not hating on the players. He may have his criticisms, and he's just an example. Dwayne Wade is another. Obviously, there's Dirk and some other people that are there. But it's a much more profound look at the game. And I think inside the NBA has a good balance of things. Sometimes they're toxic, sometimes they're helpful, and just the nature of the show is very fun. But ESPN in particular has a real problem with storytelling around the NBA right now because it's so drama focused. It isn't about the game anymore. And when you lean, and the reason for this, I'd say, when I say drama focused, is because sometimes the NBA product does not sell itself in its current climate. Like when the season first started, there were a lot of complaints about there's too many three-pointers. The game has become formulaic, and part of that is true. At the same time, though, because of the fact that the season is so long, as fans, people don't always feel like they have to tune into every single game. So then you have writers who are trying to figure out, like, how can I make this interesting with some things that are also factual, but not trying to overplay it. But when one thing becomes another, and then that thing, let's say, for example, locker room drama becomes the big story, now, the ratings go up, and ESPN in particular and some of these talk shows cling on to that. And now there's just an imbalance in terms of analysis versus drama. And we don't see that in the NFL. Like in the NFL, if you watch NFL Live versus the NBA today, big difference between those two shows. And I do think that there is a place and a space for the ways that basketball consumers consume the strategy of basketball. But ESPN in particular they just don't lean on it. They don't even try it. And maybe, I don't know that the analysts, because of the culture that I think that they have created in terms of the drama and how much they play into it, a lot of it is like what Kendrick Perkins thinks, what Richard Jefferson thinks. I think Jay Williams is really, really good at kind of dispelling some of these things. But a lot of these people are just hot take artists. And because of that, now you're in a vacuum. Where if it's not Stephen A. who's giving a hot take, it's Kendrick Perkins, it's whoever else is in that seat at that given moment. And I think these new broadcast partners are going to lean away from that because I don't think Carmelo or D Wade or Taylor Rooks or Maria Taylor or any of these other people that have signed up for this are going to sign up for the exact same thing that they hate about the media.
Well, I think it's interesting with ESPN. They've taken a lot of heat with their NBA coverage, but I do think they were successful at one point, and that was with Bill Simmons. Not necessarily as him on the studio broadcast, but with Grantland and
Yep.
with Zach Lowe and with the I think it was the Grantland Basketball Hour, Jalen and Jacoby. Like
Yep.
these were shows that were really delving into basketball culture. Like they would have their criticisms, they would have their opinions, but they also would show love to a lot of things that are happening in the league, and it was interesting. And then they got rid of all that. And
Yeah.
now you
I
have,
mean, you mentioned something
yeah,
let me cut in really
of
quickly. You
course.
mentioned something that's really, really interesting about this is the people that I just named in particular. If I say Dwayne Wade, Dirk, and Carmelo, all very highly respected figures in the league, and I know that the league has a fraternity of brothers. You know, when you play in the league, that they tip your cap to them just because you made it. And like some of the people who are critiquing the game on ESPN just don't have that same nod that maybe the legends do. Like when you watch Inside the NBA, all of them I think are heralded
Yeah.
as somewhat iconic figures. Maybe Kenny not as much, but people remember him on championship teams. And if Shaq and Chuck speak for themselves, but when it's like people who didn't dominate their era who are coming out and saying, "Oh, this person's legacy means this person's legacy means that," it's sort of like, what about your legacy? You know what I mean? It just doesn't sound the same when someone who, let's say averaged 9 to 15 points, it didn't significantly impact or have an impact over a long period of time, is critiquing superstars of the NBA today. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't. It just means it just looks funny in the light.
Well, to that point, Michael Jordan being added to the NBA coverage on NBC, how do you think that goes? I've heard either way in terms of him being brutally honest or him being super generic. I mean, are we going to see like the Last Dance Michael Jordan, or we're going to
Yeah.
see just kind of like a corporate, just, typical kind of fat saying analyst that's not interesting to watch?
Well, it's my understanding that these will probably be pre-recorded segments. I imagine he'll be breaking down specific players, and who knows, maybe he'll show up on a broadcast every now and then. I think it remains to be seen. But I don't get the sense that Michael Jordan is going to come into this and hate on the game. I don't think that that's necessarily what he's going to do. I think he's going to talk about his era and what he likes and what he doesn't like. But I think that it's going to purify things. That's my hope, at least. I think that I wouldn't be surprised if Michael Jordan was kind of exhausted of some of the same commentary and he just sits behind the scenes, and he's a billionaire, so it's just not of his concern as much anymore. But you see, and I tweeted about this the other day, this cultural divide that's essentially happening in basketball, where you have someone like LeBron James who started mind the game up again, because I truthfully just think he got tired of the conversations that he had to listen to or that he heard about. And it isn't just a LeBron and Stephen A thing. You had the confrontation between Ramona Shelburne and Aaron Gordon earlier in the playoffs. And, Ramona's an incredible reporter,
Yeah.
but you just find that these interactions are happening a lot more often, specifically in the NBA. And I think it's because there's a cultural divide between what the NBA players think the media should do and what the media how they think they should cover the NBA in particular.
I brought this up before, and you mentioned, Carmelo Anthony having his own podcast, Draymond having his own podcast. A lot of these players have their own followings now with NIL since middle school, so they have their own audience. And I realized there are different contracts that have to go on with the players and with the league in regards to their media obligations. But do you see a future that the players say, why do I need to speak to the media? I have my own platform. I'm just going to go on my platform and speak to my fans. Do you see that divide getting a lot wider in terms of these players just not seeing a role of the media anymore, due to them having their own fan base and just being able to control their own narrative? Do you think it goes drastically in that direction? Or do you think there's always a give and take and a balance that will never happen?
I think there's going to be a give and take. I mean, Draymond Green, I think, has done this a couple different times, but I don't know that it'll ever lean that way, just because you just would cause so much trouble. You would have to have an owner who's going to get behind things, and then that owner would have to be okay disrupting the culture of NBA media, and it would just cause a lot of issues. Now, maybe there's somebody out there, a high schooler or somebody that we haven't seen yet, that's going to want to do these things and is going to consistently say, get to the podium and be like, no matter how many questions he takes, is going to say, on night in and night out, I'm going to talk about this on my podcast. I'm going to talk about this on my podcast over and over and over and over again. They would make enemies out of reporters. And I just think that's the nature of things, whether it's right or it's wrong. I leave that up to the listeners to debate that. But, I think it would become exhausting to sit at a podium and be questioned about a game in and game out. And all you can say is, I'm going to talk about this on my podcast. It sounds a little far-fetched right now.
I want to hop into another aspect of the finals, and that was the presentation. A lot of uproar in terms of not airing the starting lineups, the decals on the court. Do you think this is relevant in terms of viewers? Do you think this discussion was a waste of time? Or do you think this matters in terms of really hyping up the moment? I mean, this is supposed to be different than a regular season game, different than the conference finals or the playoffs. And yet a lot of just the pomp and circumstance was missing until there was an outrage on social media. Where do you kind of lie on this kind of debate?
I think that the NBA finals did not feel as grand. That's the best way that I can put it. I think the trophies part of it, yes. Like, we've had this conversation with the Super Bowl as well. I think that people missed the nostalgic Super Bowl logos, and the NBA finals kind of got their back kicked in on that, and they put those stickers. They put the CGI stickers back on the court. And I didn't like that in particular. I think if you're going to do it, you have to do it in an authentic way where players aren't slipping on the floor. And I know that's why they said a decade ago that's why they removed them. But the entire broadcast did not feel as grand. When you're breaking news in the middle of the finals about trades and different things like that, it just doesn't feel like it matters as much. And I want to point to a story that came out today on the Washington Post on Jordan Schultz, who is an NFL insider. He's well known around the league. But one of the things and he said he was going to part ways with Fox anyways. But one of the reasons that I think they parted ways was because of the fact that in the story, he tweeted out draft picks before they happened. And he tweeted out games before they were announced in the NFL schedule release window. And those type of things are against the NFL's, I think it's against in media negotiations where you're not allowed to do that. And I don't know that that's in the NBA because we used to see Woj and Shams tweet during the NBA draft all the time. But that sort of stuff takes away from the glamour of your event. When someone is tweeting out, like, it's like, yes, we know you can do this for shits and giggles, but what's it worth? Like, what does it mean to you to get this report out, a couple seconds before? It just doesn't, it takes away from things. And I think in the NBA finals in particular, when you don't have people who are hyping this up, acting like it's the biggest thing in the world and like, oh, this is a massive underdog in the Indiana Pacers against this tectonic giant in the Oklahoma City Thunder, because the Thunder were in the regular season and in the playoffs were historically great, and Shea had an incredible season, but they just didn't talk about it. They didn't talk about it that much, or act like it was as big of a deal as it was. And that was a problem. I think that reflected in some ways of the viewership of things because they just sometimes it didn't feel like they were all the way interested in telling the story as much as they were looking forward to this crazy NBA offseason.
Yeah. I completely agree with you. I think there was a lot of compelling stories that we didn't see, like with the Thunder, like their celebration, pretty muted when they won the title. The whole thing with they're in the locker room trying to get the champagne to open and they have to ask Alex Caruso. I mean, these are narratives that we could have seen prior to this in terms of kind of them being close as a team. We've seen plenty of times on social media when SGA is being interviewed and his teammates are around him, and yet that wasn't even mentioned. I didn't see that coverage. And then with the Pacers, just, they have tons of great stories. Rick Carlisle, very compelling, and yet that was not conveyed. And I think you're right. I think that the coverage was pretty much a letdown, especially when you see other sports where like the World Series, especially the Super Bowl, other kind of massive events. It's just a huge deal in terms of the celebrities that show up, even if they're paying the celebrities to be there.
Yeah.
At least you feel like it's grand. And yet with the NBA Finals, it just seems like it's another game. I think it just detracts from the viewer and it reinforces why, hey, I don't know Oklahoma City. I don't know Indiana. Doesn't seem like it's a big deal on the presentation. Why am I going to watch? I mean, why am I going to waste my time when, unfortunately, they missed out on a great series? And I think that has a lot to
Yeah.
do with the television coverage.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I've thought about a lot on another note is the way that brands have storytold around the NBA as well, and they have failed too. Like Nike has sucked for the past 5 years, and I mean that when I say it. I'm not mincing my words. When I remember Kevin Durant winning the NBA Finals MVP in 2017, they had an advertisement immediately. Um, 2018, exact same thing. Same thing with Bron and Kobe and so many more. These lead up. I mean, my favorite NBA Finals commercials of all time are the LeBron and Kobe puppets from many years ago. Those type of things that really made it feel like these titans were going to clash. And like Converse obviously tried to do something with Shea's shoes, which I think are cool looking shoes. They're different than other basketball shoes out there. But what advertisement did you see outside of Drake's Nokia video 3 months ago, where he makes a small little cameo in there that's supposed to parallel, DeMar DeRozan and Not Like Us? Outside of that, you just didn't see that much. And I know the exact same thing with Tyrese Halliburton and Puma. Not a lot of commercials. It doesn't make this thing feel cool. And basketball is the coolest sport around. Football doesn't get signature sneakers. They wear helmets. Baseball doesn't really get signature sneakers. They wear helmets. But baseball, I would say baseball historically has been a close second, and now the NFL has tracked them down to take that spot. But basketball has not leaned into the cool factor, and neither have the brands. From the Gatorade side of things, I think Gatorade had some really good advertisements. They leaned into like the Kendrick thing and having what's the song? Peekaboo. They had Peekaboo during these commercials with all these different athletes, but it takes more than that. And I think that the brands around the NBA haven't done a good job either. And it isn't just on the brands. Like I said, though, there's blame to place everywhere. There's a lot of players who haven't had signature performances, some players who have fell flat. And sometimes companies go through this where they have to reevaluate how they tell their stories. But there, like I said, if you look at this pie, it's cut 33% from on brands, 33% on media, and 33% on the league.
So you brought up Nike, and I think that's very interesting. This wasn't on the rundown, but since you brought it up, when you mentioned just the failure of Nike, I think Caitlin Clark, and I think, how does she not have a signature shoe immediately?
It's coming.
It's just, why wasn't this where, honestly, when she was her rookie year, her first game? I mean, it seemed fairly obvious her not to have a shoe out. Why hasn't it taken this long? Like, what? Well, why is there a disconnect? It seems, I'm not an expert in sneakers or sports business,
Sure.
but it just seems obvious that she get her signature shoe the first game of the FIFA season last year.
Well, I think there's in that in particular, Nike has been a little bit behind the ball, I'd say, in women's basketball. Like obviously they got out of front and had Sabrina's shoe has been incredibly successful, particularly on the NBA court. Like there's a lot of men who wear that shoe. Um, and then of course you had Brianna Stewart with the Stewie Puma shoe. But I do think from an optics perspective that it would have looked weird in a league that, let's say, is 70% women of color and of course within that are LGBTQ members or women who identify in that community. And all three of the women, if this happened, the first three women you roll out are all white women. It makes it appear as if the only people within your league that are marketable are white women. And Asia Wilson was obviously dominating. I think she was well deserving of that. But it didn't feel like that Nike wanted to give her a shoe until there was an uproar about like which black woman is going to get a shoe. And it could have well been in the works before that. But when you stay quiet as long as they have, and mind you, like Asia has been in the league for a long time. But again, if you don't make these people sound like titans, then no one's going to look at them like that. And for Caitlin, we knew Caitlin was a titan. I just think that there's this idea right now in sports, particularly after Mikey Williams, where you don't want to jump too quick to give anybody anything. Everybody has to earn it. And I imagine that Caitlin will have her shoe probably before the end of the year. I would, maybe around the playoffs or in December, around Christmas time, something around that. But I mean, Wemby had his logo on, I think it was a GT cut, and we haven't even seen Caitlin's yet for whatever reason. But I think that you're right in this in an aspect that they should have came out in all bonkers and thrown everything at the wall to try to gas this up, but the WNBA just moves at a tad bit different speed than what the NBA does.
Yeah, that's been my beef with that entire league, and especially now that it's more popular than ever. Tons of great stars, uh, tons of compelling teams, storylines, and I think that the leadership seems to move at a snail's like pace, and I think that's a concern. I brought that up many a times in terms of the leadership of the league, in terms of capitalizing on this moment now, and I just think not it's not only the leadership of the W, but also the brands associated with that as well. That I'm worried that they might miss the boat on that. It just is a concern of mine that I have, especially heading into your labor negotiations.
Yeah, I think that the labor negotiations are going to be really, really interesting. I mean, Sportico just had their team valuations come out. You have the Golden State Valkyries who are crushing it, the Liberty, the Fever, and the Aces. I think that's the top four. But if you're the players looking at these valuations continue to rise, like how do you not go full fledged like all the way and like if we don't get what we want, we're gonna lock this out. And the league has not said much on the record. Anytime that Kathy gets in front of a podium, she says that she's not going to negotiate in the media. And the union, I think, has been very aggressive in saying that, look, this is where we're at. We are prepared to hold out if it comes to that. I think that the next time we'll hear Commissioner Engelbert talk about this will be at WNBA All-Star. And I anticipate that she's going to say the exact same thing that she has said the past couple times that she's asked about it, which is that she's not going to negotiate in the media. The NBA does their best not to. But it's going to be interesting. And the thing that I'm watching to see the most is to see if Caitlin Clark does get involved in these media negotiations in any sort of capacity. Because yes, like there's arguments to be made that she's not the best WNBA player right now. And I think that's completely true. She isn't, but she's the most important player. And when your biggest figure in terms of viewership, draw, popularity, whatever metric you want to use, Caitlin Clark is at the top. If she gets involved in these media negotiations, and she doesn't have to be the most vocal person in the world, because you have to remember this is just her sophomore season, and this is also her first time labor negotiating as well. But if she comes to the table and even says something that, backs the players in a way that lets the league know, hey, this is where we're at, and I'm behind this, then I think it could put the league on notice. Now, I don't know that has happened yet. But we'll have to see. I think that's something that I'm watching for in particular. We've heard Angel Reese talk. We've heard Dejanay Carrington, I believe that's her last name.
Yeah.
We've heard all of them talk, but there's one person that I think we're waiting to see if they jump in the party. And from a cultural perspective within the league, her jumping in the party, I think, makes her one of them. There's been this argument, of course, about like, is Caitlyn one of the girls? The women resent her, yada, yada, yada. If she jumps in these media negotiations and is foot to the ground or puts the foot on WNBA's throat, you're not going to have any questions about that anymore.
Before we move on, I had another journalist, and they mentioned Unrivaled is going to be a massive factor in this. Do you agree with that, especially with Breanna Stewart and Nafisa Collier being involved in this other league? They were able to have a lot of success, big-time media rights on TNT, a lot of eyes. Do you think that's leverage in this whole situation, or do you think that doesn't matter in this?
I do think it matters. I think it taught them something. It taught the players something. There was a bunch of WNBA execs who went down and watched as well. I think it matters in the aspect of like seeing how much money they got from Turner and Warner Brothers Discovery. I think that when you look at the WNBA's media negotiations, of course, a $2.2 billion deal that has the potential to reach $3 and then opt out after I believe it's the 28-29 season or the 27-28 season. One of the two, it has the opportunity to reevaluate in a couple years from now. And my question, I guess, to that is like, why would you have that clause in there if you didn't feel like maybe necessarily that it was undervalued a bit? Now, I'm not saying that it wasn't a successful media negotiation. What I'm saying is that if you felt so proudly about this media negotiation, then why do you want to go back to the table in such a short time period? You don't see the NBA doing that. The NBA is very happy with their $76 billion deal. And you see the WNBA being like, we're going to reevaluate things on essentially a handshake agreement between the league and its media partners to go back to the table because it's in everyone's best interest to keep the sport growing. I just think that if that's in the writing or is in a promise, that you probably could have got more. And I think from the player's perspective, as you look at Unrivaled, as you look at all of the things that they were able to do in year one, it's like if we did all this in year one and it's taking us this long in a WNBA that is backed by billionaires, what's the holdup? We'll
No.
find out by probably in, I think the last day is October 31st. So Halloween's going to be interesting.
Yeah, totally agree. I want to shift to the Lakers. Now Mark Walter becoming the owner. He has a great portfolio of different sports teams. I kept hearing that with this transaction, with Mark Walter becoming the owner, that this pushes the Lakers into kind of 21st century sports and ownership. And it's something I don't really understand because they're the glamour franchise of the NBA. They get all the best players, they win championships. I don't understand what they mean by that. Can you explain what this transaction means in terms of how this will affect the Lakers and how this enhances their profile? Because they're already one of the most known teams. They got Luca, they've got LeBron,
Sure.
they won the title in the bubble. I mean, I don't really know what else can really enhance them. So,
Yeah, I
do you know
think
what these pundits mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, the best way that I can put it, and I'll leave it to, some of the insiders to get into the details about this because they cover this a little bit more closely than I do. But as I understand it, is that the Lakers are notoriously cheap. So yes, like the valuation that they got in this transaction and in the one years ago when Walter originally bought the 27% stake was built on the fact that A, the market is the second biggest, and B, it's the Lakers. Like the brand is a top five brand across American sports. Like you could only put potentially the Yankees, the Cowboys. I wouldn't put the Knicks, even though the Knicks, of course, are a huge popular brand. It's probably just Yankees and Cowboys, really. And of course, the Dodgers are big now as well. But when you think about like championships and all of the stars that they've had, all of that is part of that valuation. Now, from the business side of things, when the people are talking about coming to the 21st century, there's a lot of things the Lakers weren't doing in terms of data and analytics, in terms of staffing, in terms of the upkeeping of various things. And when Mark Walter is somebody who's not going to spare any expense to try to make this a winning organization. I mean, you look at what's happening with the Dodgers and how he's transformed that team. There's a lot of excitement around that. Now, the interesting thing is that Jeannie Buss is staying on as governor for however many years. We don't know how many years she's going to stay on just yet, but she's not going anywhere, which means, and what that means for the board of governors or for people who don't understand is that every team has a governor. The governor makes decisions. They attend the league meetings. They vote, all of those things. So Walter's not at those meetings yet. That doesn't mean that he's not in charge of the team, but it's in agreement that she will be the governor. So there isn't a scenario, as I understand it, unless, she did something, God forbid, something horrific, where he could just be like, you know what, you're out of here. Because of the fact that when he bought this majority stake in the franchise, there's a condition in there that says you're going to stay on for X amount of years. So it'll be interesting to see from the decision making standpoint how the Lakers continue to operate.
No, completely agreed. Last question for you. Adam Silver recently talked about league expansion. You mentioned the big media rights deal that is complete. Next on the table is which teams are gonna, which cities are be receiving teams possibly. Adam Silver's talked about international expansion as well. What do you think the framework is with Adam Silver in his philosophy? Do you think it goes what we think is gonna go with Seattle or Las Vegas or teams within the United States, or do you think he's really dead set on his international path and he abandons that and this goes with some kind of this international league that he's been discussing that we've been hearing reports and rumors about for over the past year? Like what happens next in terms of how the NBA expands over the summer?
I think the international league is years away. Everybody I talk to around the league, it just got announced, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. There's a lot of different things that need to happen. A lot of different conversations with some of the European teams over there. Raising money, hiring bankers, all of those things. That's years away. Now the NBA expansion is something that's on the docket. The NBA domestic expansion is something that's on the docket. right in July during the summer league, and so they'll have a conversation about it. I think that they'll evaluate whether they want to, whether they don't. I do think that they will officially begin the exploration process. Um, but it's really about, like, do the owners want to split revenue again by adding two more teams? Now, obviously, all of these owners will split an expansion fee, and in some aspects, I think it was last summer, my colleague Kim and I wrote about how the Vegas team in particular could hit a $7 billion fee, and the way that it would get there is a $5 billion expansion fee, and if someone has to build a stadium, you automatically have to assume that the stadium is going to cost $2 billion. 5 plus 2 is 7. I don't know that happens because of course, there's T-Mobile Arena, and there's been a lot of conversations about who wants to build where in Las Vegas, because that team is going to be ultra valuable. They're not going to have any issue selling luxury suites. And in Seattle, you have Samantha Holloway, who has control of that arena. That doesn't mean that someone won't come in and try to challenge her, or a city like Nashville or Austin, Texas, or maybe Kansas City, even Mexico City. All of these places they may be able to challenge her, but I think that the easiest thing is Seattle and Las Vegas. But from the NBA owner's perspective, you have to decide if you want to divide up this revenue by adding two more partners, and if what the fee is going to be. There's a lot of things that they have to discuss, but Vegas and Seattle are easily the favorites. There are people lining up in both cities.
Now it's going to be very interesting to watch. Randall, thanks for your insight. Truly appreciate it. Can you let our audience know where they can find you on social media, where they can find your work, and any other projects you have going on for the rest of the year?
Sure. I'm at Bloomberg News, Randall Williams. I'm Googleable there on Twitter. I'm Randall Williams, and on Instagram, if you search Randall Williams, I'll pop up. So it's 2 A's and 2 L's in my name, and that's my story.
Randall, thank you very much for the time. Truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.